Can't hear me, I will use it. I'll put it on here. My name is Linda Cotter. I teach at a Catholic school in German Village on the south side of Columbus. I assume most of you are from the area. And I wanted to come today with my students, not only because they're wonderful, these are actually my students from last year. They're now fifth graders, they've moved on. But because every time I come to this conference, I wish there was more for elementary teachers. That's one of the reasons I'm here. And the other reason is I really feel like in social studies, to address all the new core standards and English language arts and all the others, that this project really hits those core standards. And although it looks really elaborate, I'll give you a little background. What it is I teach fourth grade, and if any of you teach that level, you know that it's largely Ohio history, a giant timeline from beginning to end, at least it is in our school system. And one of the topics that I found the hardest to teach was the Constitution, the structure of government. I was just bored to tears with drawing a tree and saying these are the three branches of government and all of that. I wanted something that was more engaging, that would get the children involved. So there was an election or something going on, this was 10 years ago, and our second graders had to learn about voting. So we partnered up with them, and we started out by having a women's suffrage tea. And the two classes read together the book, A Long Way to Go, which some of you may be familiar with. And the fourth graders were kind of the leaders of discussing the book and everything. And then after that, the second grade teacher didn't want to do it again, and I loved it. So, in case you can't tell, I like dressing up. I like doing all the 19th century culture. And so I decided that it applied very well to the government unit. So what I did was I've set this up so that in the classroom, I have lessons on the Constitution. I have a collection of books in the classroom. Some of them are here. We're writing the Constitution. If you were there, those books, most of these you've probably seen. We the Kids, if you haven't, you can look at them later. We the People, the story of the Constitution. I also have a collection, I didn't bring them all, of books about women and women's rights. I brought the If You Lived When Women Won Their Rights book. But what I do is I have a collection of classroom books and a series of lessons that involves learning about the Constitution. We go to the site, Constitution for Kids, and we learn the structure, we learn the branches of government. I provide all that in the classroom in the form of about a week-long lesson set. Then we move on to 19th century culture and history. So in this group today, I have about half my class from last year. We had a lot of people that were child labor activists. They were trying to work against child labor. There were people that were abolitionists. When I say people, children that represented them in this project. All those kinds of people. So they had to have a multi-layered timeline where they figured out, oh, anti-slavery people were working. The temperance movement was going on. There was a religious movement happening. So all of these things were simultaneous, and that's really important for fourth graders because sometimes they think a timeline is just one layer. So they have to learn about all of these movements, and they have got to pick a person to reenact. Then they had to research that person, learn all about them. And in the classroom, I was providing lessons on Victorian etiquette, women's sphere, men's sphere, how did children live, what was life like in Victorian times. And I'll give you a link to a Dropbox folder that has all of this, but a really fabulous place to go for that kind of thing. There's a simulation game. If you Google McCord Museum, it's actually in Canada. They have a series of historic games, and one of them is on the Victorian age. So when you get to the museum page, and as I said, I've got all these links on in a Dropbox folder for you. When you go to the museum, you can do the Civil War in the United States. You can do Native peoples, and it's about Canada and the US. And there are a lot of simulation games about the Victorian time, and that's the one I used. And I can't remember the name of the game. Do any of you remember? It was up on the smart board.
Oh, was it that game that
Yes,
we played
we're
when
in.
you picked that thing?
They got to pick they got to pick a character and then go to different houses. Yes, you remember that? Yeah. And then over the last 10 years that I've been doing this, I've bought out most thrift stores in Ohio. In fact, I think some of them call me now. They'll say, some lady dropped off a box of hats. Or I've been on eBay and I've been known to buy like gloves from an estate sale, 40 pair of gloves in a box. So I own gloves, bow ties. This is like 1/10 of what I have. These guys know this is true. There are costumes in my room right now on a rack. They had to come in and try on everything. We try to fit it to the time period, and of course we're not perfect, but we make it look good. We think we do anyway. So it takes about 6 weeks to do this unit, the teaching part. And the culmination is a trip to the Ohio State House. I don't know if you know this, but you can contact the Sergeant at Arms and request a hearing room. There's no charge for that. You give them a couple of dates and they will book it for you. And the rooms vary in size. We've been in smaller rooms than this and also larger rooms, and they're usually set up like this, except the State House was built in the 1860s, so it's a much better site than this room for doing a 19th century, early 20th century reenactment. We also had to do things like learn how to walk in a long skirt and a hoop. We learned the many layers of clothing worn by women and how that affected their daily lives. We learned how the men had to behave and dress and why that affected their roles every day, and why women couldn't vote, and how in the world would they ever get the right to vote when they have no say in anything. So it was a long process of they learned that you can have a grassroots movement at the state level. Women first got their rights at the school boards and in the churches. And eventually we're pushing those men for more. And these young ladies and gentlemen, all of them are reenacting people on both sides of the issue. And as they heard both sides, they also learned how the Constitution could be amended. And one of the big exciting things that we did was we watched the film, most of it. There's a short section that I don't let them see, but Iron-Jawed Angels, are any of you familiar with that? Hilary Swank plays the part of Alice Paul, who was if you don't know, a major suffrage leader And I think it's, what's her name?
Marley.
No, Carrie Chapman Catt was played by, do you remember her name?
No.
I think it's Olivia something. But anyway, it's called Iron-Jawed Angels. If you don't know the story, you've probably seen the pictures of the women picketing the White House. It's a classic photo that's on all the women's suffrage sites. What they were holding, President Wilson was getting ready for the war in Europe, and he would have all these quotes about democracy. And the women took the quotes and put them on the banners because they were quotes about freedom and getting your rights. They would stand outside the White House. This movie shows the women's suffrage movement and the split, where Carrie Chapman Catt's leading one group and Alice Paul is leading the other, and how at the end of the movie they come together and the amendment finally passes. So I think you are the only one here that's portrayed other than President Wilson. Yes. So Woodrow Wilson's here, and Carrie Chapman Catt's here, and Alice Paul went to another school this year, so we don't have to go into that. So anyway, it's a great film to watch. You may have others, but it is very graphic. I got parental permission to show the movie because they do show these women were force-fed when they went to prison, and that is in part of the movie. And they were, forced to stand with their arms in the air, and all of that's in there. However, it does really clearly show the progression of how they got their rights and how the amendment passed. And it has the final vote. It shows the story of the guy whose mother sends him a telegraph at the end. I don't know how many of you know this, and he's the deciding vote. That's all in the movie. So it's wonderful. So that's my overview of what I do. When I'm all done teaching all this, there are assessments. It's not just a trip to the State House. They have a packet. And in the packet, they are responding to questions when we learn about the Constitution and having classroom discussions. That'll be in that Dropbox folder. There are sheets for books that they read. They have to read a biography of a suffragist or an anti-suffragist. And there are reader response activities like writing in your journal, those types of things. It's 38 pages long, stapled and handed out for you all, so that's why I didn't duplicate it. But for the children, I think it's about a dozen pages of work, and there's a line at the bottom of each page, which these parents know that they have to sign. So when they do their book report, it's signed. When they do, the next thing, it's signed. So it works really well. I have wonderful parental cooperation. These people all took the day to be here and bring their children. So don't clap for us, you can clap for them. So you have, at the end, we go to the State House. They present their speeches before whoever is available. And you're going to be hearing them today. And I have to say, we haven't done them since last April. So I do have, when they go in the spring, they actually have memorized these. So they're standing at a podium in the hearing room, and they barely look down. Today I told them, hey, you haven't done those all summer, so you have to look down at the book here. So ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I believe the first speaker today is ready. You want to introduce yourself.